The Edmonton Oilers have themselves a good old-fashioned chicken or the egg. What's really tanking their season? Goalie or defense?
You are Locked On Oilers, your daily podcast on the Edmonton Oilers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's edition of Locked On Oilers. I am your host, Nick Zararis. I want to thank everyone who's making Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. Locked On Oilers, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's show is brought to you by FanDuel, where you can start the season with a big return. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets. If you win your first $5 bet, visit FanDuel.com to get started. So today's show, this is one of those ones that's for me. If you're familiar with how the movie business works on occasion, an actor will want to do a passion project where they won't get paid as much as they typically would on a normal movie. This is one for me. This is one where I went into the data and I looked and I really wanted to try and get an understanding of what was giving the Oilers so many issues this season. So we're going to break it down. We're going to start our first segment. We are going to dive into which end of the spectrum, the defense or the goaltending, isn't pulling its respective amount of weight in the balance of responsibility for this season. The second segment, we are going to dive specifically into the goaltending situation and why I think that one bears a little bit more examination. And then in our final segment, we are going to tackle where the Oilers can find improvement, what improvement would look like, and how interconnected these two components of the game actually are. And I want to start there. For this first segment, it is really important for you to understand that nothing happens in a vacuum. If you don't take anything else from this episode, you need to understand that nothing in sport or frankly in life happens in a vacuum. As much as we like black and white concrete answers, a lot of life and a lot of answers within sports specifically are gray, because you need to think about this from a problem-solving manner. You want to think about this in terms of, the scientific method from when you were in grade school. You got to think about it in terms of, well, what's our question? The Oilers defense is struggling. Yes. The Oilers goaltending is struggling. Yes. The Oilers offense is struggling. Yes. Okay. In a vacuum, those three things would all be independent of each other, but they are inherently and fundamentally connected. All three of the Oilers units struggling simultaneously tells you that there is something wrong here. You should be having alarm bells going off, sirens, red lights, everything in your imagination to tell you, your check engine light is on right now. And the NHL is funky because in the NHL, if you have as much individual talent as the Oilers do when they are fully healthy, when they have McDavid, when everybody's humming, they can get by with pretty subpar play most nights, just simply because the vast majority of NHL teams are not that talented. They are not that good. And I talked about this in regards to the loss to the Devils on Monday night, but I think it bears worth repeating here. The Devils did not play a very sound structural game. They didn't play well. I wouldn't say the Devils did anything amazing. They beat the Oilers at their own game. They got out to a lead. They used their speed and they used their skill. And that made up for the Devils' lack of structure. In an ideal world, you don't want to be playing a game that open-ended. Like, sure, you won the goal split, so it doesn't really matter. The Devils won the game. So they should feel relatively okay with that. But when we're peeling it back and we want to analyze that within their entire season, it's hard to win hockey games like that. And I think that's the biggest key to understanding the Oilers' early season woes right now. The Oilers are built to play hockey in one specific style and win one specific type of game, at least right now. And look, we understand that there are moves to come. The Oilers are going to have to add guys to this roster. Just simply put, if the Oilers go through the entire season with this configuration of guys, they will have done their own undoing. If they don't trade for a top four defenseman, if they don't go out and get another middle six forward, that's on them. And you should, in your expectations, in your calculations, you're calculating your emotional feelings of how much you want to invest of your soul. But at a certain point, there becomes a point of diminishing return where it is not worth it for you to get as emotionally invested if they don't start to dig this out. And that was the final segment of our post Devils game episode. Was at what point does this pressure to dig out of this hole become too much to overcome? Because right now, it's early. It is very early. You don't want to go writing anything definitive yet. No one is dead. No one is in serious trouble yet. You're 6-1. You have 13 points. You're third in the division. But again, that is a testament to the NHL at large. I do want to reiterate here. If the goal is just to make the playoffs and see what happens, the Oilers should be able to do that on roller skates. They should be able to do that asleep, how easy it should be for this Oilers team to make the playoffs. When you look at the Western Conference, especially that underbelly, that soggy middle and that bottom that are just littered with mediocre and outright bad teams, and you're in the Pacific Division where you're definitely better than both the Sharks and the Ducks. You have consistently hammered the Kings. You should be better than the Flames. Sure. Is Vegas good? Yeah, they're talented. Vancouver's talented. You should be able to hang with those teams in the regular season because you get to beat up on the bad teams. And that's really where you separate yourself as a good team, is when it comes to the playoffs and you have to actually play other good teams. You find a way to get those weak links, to root out the soft spots of your lineup and get better results. And it's hard to do. You know, I say it all the time. The difference between bad and mediocre is a lot easier to close than the difference between good and great, because the difference between good and great, it's not that big. The difference between good and great in professional hockey is very marginal. But over time, that marginal gap accumulates and accumulates and accumulates. 1% doesn't sound like a lot, but 1% every game, pretty soon you went from 50-50 to 57-43. You know, really quickly, you let that marginal gap add up one game after another, and that ultimately is your undoing. And I want to get in these numbers real quick, but possession-wise, the Oilers are doing what they should be doing. They have a majority of the expected goals, a majority of the high danger goals. They are playing at a pretty high rate of offense. They have the second most scoring chances per 60. They have the fifth most expected goals, the sixth most high danger goals. The problem is the puck's not going in. And I've said a lot over the first month of the season or so that this won't stand forever. You know, the Oilers are going to get on a heater, especially at 5-on-5. They're going to get Hyman in one of those 5 goals in 7 games windows. They're going to get Arvidsson on a nice little run. He'll have 3 goals in 5 games. It'll happen. When you have this much possession and you score this often, and don't score this often, there will be an eventual correction. That's the way the law of averages works. You know, it's going to find its level. Water is going to find its level, and that's going to be okay. The problem is the Oilers can't just wait for that to come. The Oilers can't just wait for that correction to happen. They need to take active, proactive steps. And we're going to talk a little bit about that in our second segment when we compare how the Oilers play in front of Calvin Pickard versus Stuart Skinner, coming up next on this edition of Locked On Oilers. So be sure to stick around. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at PrizePicks. With PrizePicks, you can win up to 100 times your money with as little as 4 correct picks. PrizePicks is the best place to get real money sports action. Join over 10 million users and sign up today. PrizePicks puts their members first, so all withdrawals are fast, safe, and secure. When my picks hit, I can get my money in as quick as 15 minutes. Sign up today and get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It is guaranteed. If you think Leon Draisaitl is going to have more than a goal, you can do something like that. If you think Evan Bouchard is going to have more than 2.5 shots on goal, if you want to get risky and you want to do something like Victor Arvidsson over half a point, All of that is on the table with PrizePicks. So download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNHL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Again, download the app, use code LOCKEDONNHL, get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, run your game. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this Wednesday edition of Locked On Oilers, where we are unwinding a difficult question, because this is one of those chicken or egg questions, and a lot of it comes down to how you watch hockey. And that's going to sound weird because you're going to say, well, Nick, everyone watches hockey the same because it's hockey. It's a game. It's happening in front of you. How could people interpret that differently? Well, first of all, some people are only going to look at what they look for. And for a lot of people, they're only looking at the puck. They are not watching the play develop. They are not watching the read. That is a layer on top of how the average person watches the game. Then you get on top of that, you go a layer deeper. You get to someone who's doing some data. I wouldn't say I'm doing the data analysis. I just compile the data and then put it into a spreadsheet. I read it. I make sure the numbers check based on the databases. And then I try and draw conclusions, because when you marry a visual representation, you watch the game, or you watch highlights, and you go back and watch sequences, and you start to try and peel back why things happen. That's where you glean the deeper understanding. And that's where you can really make some strong conclusions. And I have a good example for you. Anecdotally, everyone always feels like the team plays better in front of the backup goalie. Whether it's true or not, that is something you have to go into the data and look at. And lo and behold, I went and did that today. And statistically, the Oilers play better, at least 5-on-5, in front of Calvin Pickard. Now, we have to account for the workload discrepancy. The starts are, I believe it's 7-4. Hang on, my notes are right in front of me. I got to blah, 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 goalies. Yes, it's 8 starts to 5 starts. I want to make sure I get that in there, because that does matter. You know, I do think the more games you get, the closer you're going to get to a true average. You know, that's why the tallest point on a standard distribution is in the dead center, the average, because it's the most common outcome. You know, if you were to do people by height, for men, I believe it's 5'10". For women, I believe it's 5'7", Actually, no, excuse me. It's 5'5" for women, at least in the United States. But if you were to line everyone up, that middle group would be the tallest. And being that it's 8-5, that's a relatively even split. You know, the Oilers have had some back-to-backs. Skinner missed a game because he was injured, so you got an extra Pickard start in there that you might not necessarily have gotten if the Oilers were to stick to their plan. But the results have been a little bit dire so far. You know, Skinner is sitting here at 3-4. Skinner is sitting here with an .881 save percentage, a 3.31 goals against average, and he's got the 47th most goals saved above expected. Pickard is 3-2 with an .866 save percentage, a 2.0 goals against average, and the 60th most goals saved above expected. You know, both goalies right now, it's fair to say, are playing bad. Not below average, bad. The statistics bear out those are below average performances. Now, we can build a layer on top of that and analyze it through the lens of the team, because the lens of the team is ultimately what's going to give you an honest account. And you heard me before in that first segment talking about a really talented team being able to outplay some of their mistakes, to be able to outplay some of their problems. And star players can do that. You know, you watch McDavid, you watch Draisaitl, they can outplay problems around them. You watch a Nikita Kucherov, you watch a David Pastrnak, you watch a Makar or a McKinnon. When the best players in the world impose their will on a game, they are a gravitational force. They can alter everything around them, and the game happens the way they choose to have it, the way they want it to play. Once you start getting lower and lower and lower in the pecking order of talent, eventually you start to get to guys who are dependent. They're environmental dependent, line mate dependent, team dependent. Goalies, of course, are the most team dependent position in the entire sport. And you can say what you want about goalies needing to make saves from time to time. And that's fair. I agree with you. Every now and then you do need your goalie to make a save in spite of what's going on in front of them. But we also understand that environment matters so unbelievably much for goalie. And it's why it's so hard to track goaltender results year over year. And I want to use this to try and articulate a point. Hockey has so many variables. There are so many moving parts in a given play. You have your 5 skaters on each team. You have your 2 goalies. You have the referees. You have the rules. The more variables you introduce to an equation or to a problem, the more complicated it becomes to replicate that. And right now, the Oilers are trying to replicate really difficult environmental factors to win. When they are struggling to score in the way they are, and I do want to read these because this is important. So in Pickard's 5 starts, at 5-on-5, the Oilers are averaging 2.2 goals per game. The Oilers are averaging 1.3 goals per game at 5-on-5 in Stuart Skinner's starts. Pickard is getting almost a full more goal of run support. And then once you go under the hood, they are conceding significantly less defensively in front of Pickard. The Oilers are averaging 1.18 goals, expected goals against. In front of Skinner, they are conceding 2.28. So we're talking about 1.2 more expected goals per game. And then when you go to the high danger chances, it's more of the same. The Oilers are conceding they are conceding 2 more high danger scoring chances per game in front of Skinner than they are in front of Pickard. And I really do believe this is a psychological reflection. And this is something I've always anecdotally felt, but until the last few years, haven't had the data to support that point. A team is almost always going to play better in front of a backup goalie because there is a more innate understanding of how important the results in front of them are to said player's success. They know Calvin Pickard can't win them the game by himself. So they are going to be more conservative. They are going to take fewer chances. They are going to be tighter defensively. And then subconsciously, those guys are thinking to themselves, well, Skinner's got this. I've been very good this season about not mixing up Jeff and Stuart Skinner when talking about them in the middle of a sentence, but that was a bad one. Hand up on me. In front of Stuart Skinner, those guys are like, well, Stewie's got it. He's been great. I trust him to make this play if I mess up. And I am not saying these guys on the Oilers are messing up more because they think Stuart Skinner is going to bail them out. I am saying that human nature is difficult. I am saying that in those guys' subconsciouses, they all feel, well, if I make a mistake, Stewie's got me. He's going to make the play. And that leads a player to be more inclined to make a more risky play, to make a more difficult play. And I'm not saying you need to root out all risk because creativity is fundamentally rooted in risk in any walk of life. But right now, when you look at the splits in terms of pretty much every single aspect, the Oilers are playing better hockey in front of Calvin Pickard than they are in front of Stuart Skinner. And they're still not playing well when they're playing in front of Calvin Pickard. They are just conceding less. And right now, the Oilers are playing extremely high event hockey, which means lots of chances back and forth for both teams. And when you are a struggling defensive team and a struggling team in net, that creates more volatility. You don't want to put the emphasis on your weak links. And right now, the Oilers' inability to score consistently is just putting a bigger magnifying glass on the goalie and on the defense. And until the Oilers can get the puck in the net consistently at 5-on-5, it is going to feel every single night like 2 goals is insurmountable. And it's crazy to say about what's supposed to be a high-scoring team. But right now, the Oilers are in the mix. They are spinning the tires in the mud. They are hitting posts. They are getting goalied. And everything that can go wrong is going wrong. And they should feel fortunate to sit where they're at record-wise, and for the fact that their division is so mediocre that they're off to a bad start, and they're still in a playoff spot as of the moment. So we're going to take one more break on today's edition of Locked On Oilers. We come back, we're going to try and tie it all together and explain why defense and goaltending are so inherently connected in hockey. Get ready to tackle NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game You can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Visit FanDuel.com to join today. In the NFL this week, we've got good old school AFC North. Joe Burrow and the Bengals taking on Lamar and the Ravens. The Ravens are 6.5-point home favorites. Got good Sunday night game. The Detroit Lions, maybe the best team in the entire NFL, heading down to Houston to take on the struggling Houston Texans. The Lions are 3.5-point road favorites. So if you want to get in on the action, head on over to FanDuel.com where you can get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this Wednesday midweek edition of Locked On Oilers. Tonight, after the game against the Golden Knights, you will hear from me whether or not it comes out on Wednesday night or Thursday morning. It depends, how quick the game ends, how quick I can churn out the episode, how quick I can come up with some ideas for what's interesting to talk about. But the plan is to do post-game episodes when it's feasible. And building off of that, right now, the Oilers are kind of in a weird spot. The Oilers are a talented hockey team. The Oilers have issues. Every team in the NHL, even the good one, has issues right now. Every single team is still trying to figure out who they're going to be. And that sounds very meta and philosophical for professional hockey, which is littered with people who don't know who Robert Nietzsche is. But at a certain point, you have to accept what you are. And right now, the Oilers are a talented but underperforming team. Overcoming that underperformance is going to be tricky. The fact that we are a month in and the Oilers still can't really score with any consistency when this is a team predicated on scoring, that's concerning. That's your check engine light. The fact that you are this talented of a team and you're only shooting 5%, that is concerning. 5% of 5-on-5, I should specify. But when you are a team that is built around the power play and your power play isn't scoring, when you had one of the best penalty kills of all time in the playoffs last year, and now it's almost academic that every game you're conceding a penalty kill goal against, it is at a certain point, you become what you are. I think the Oilers have a lot of room. They have a lot of room internally, and the runway around them makes it where they have the opportunity to climb out of this mess. All of that said, at a certain point, you gotta score goals. When you are this talented of a hockey team, you need to score goals. And I do genuinely, in my heart of hearts, think if the Oilers start scoring with more consistency, the defensive woes will dissipate. Because if they can score first, they can get to their game faster. You heard me talk about it as soon as the Devils game ended. That was what we talked about in our opening segment. We went really deep and explained why the Devils are very similar to the Oilers in that respect. When they get a lead, it plays into how they want to play. You're swimming against the current. And that's what the Oilers were doing on Monday night. It is hard to score against a team that likes to counterattack because they want you to take crappy shots. They want you to hold to the outside. They want you to settle for less. And when you do that, you naturally and inherently give them the puck back, and it lets them break out and go the other way and gives them opportunity. All of it is interconnected. Hockey is a very complicated sport, and I am not trying to single anyone out. I have been very, very vocal in that I think you need to break up Ekholm and Bouchard because you cannot continue to play Darnell Nurse with Dermott Stetcher or Emberson because none of those guys is good enough to carry someone right now. And I do think the Oilers should seriously consider having Nurse work on his injury because his injury prevented him from having a training camp. He only got in one preseason game. So you're telling me he spent an entire offseason rehabbing. He got no preseason work, one game of preseason work, basically no training camp. And you just expected him to hit the ground running, playing 20 minutes a night. As much as I complain about Nurse, the hockey player, and his functionality, how his skill set, his decision-making, the Oilers aren't putting him in a position to succeed either. And I am always of the opinion it is incumbent upon the team to put a player in a position to succeed because the player can't pick who they play with and where they play in the lineup. Sure, they can get some influence, they can get some say in what they choose to do, how they're used, what they feel comfortable with. But ultimately, it's on Chris Knobloch to start getting better results out of his team. And I'm not saying Chris Knobloch's doing a bad job right now. He's trying to juggle a lot of different factors, but the Oilers have a lot of questions to answer about the state of their team. I still think, in terms of priority, the offense is the most culpable in this slow start. And I do fundamentally believe that if they start scoring with the way they're supposed to, that will take some heat off of the defense, and that'll take some heat off of the goaltender. That said, it is still all interconnected. All three components of the game are inherently woven together, and anybody who's just trying to say, well, it's the defense, well, it's Skinner, well, it's Pickard. No, it is all three. The Oilers are a score impacts team. They need a lead, and then they get to their game, and then they start to pick you apart, and they use all their skill, and they use all their speed, and they take the heat off of their defense, because all their defense has to do is get the puck from the defense to the offense, and that unlocks more. It is a really complicated and dense subject matter. You know, I see people always want to blame the goalie for a goal against, but you gotta look at the buildup. You gotta look at the sequence. What happened leading up to the goal? What happened before you took the shot? What happened in the net mouth? You know, I think about the one Devil goal last night where Nurse was wrestling with Dougie Hamilton in the crease, knocking Hamilton into Pickard, looking with his back to the play. The play is behind him, the puck is in the slot, and he's busy wrestling Dougie Hamilton in the crease for some reason, as opposed to trying to make a play on the puck. But it happens on another level so much further back. That sequence happens because there's 8 different things along the way. 8 different things along the way lead you to that eventual goal. But that will do it for today's edition of Locked On Oilers. If you could be so kind, please subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, please give the show a 5-star review. If you're watching over on YouTube, hit the subscribe button. Let me know in the comments whether you think it's more the defense or Skinner's fault. I will talk to you guys tomorrow tonight, after the Vegas Golden Knights game. Until then, let's go Oilers.